In the last section, we started talking about leadership. If you remember, we have talked previously about what managers do and how various forms of management have developed. We talked about people like Frederick Taylor. We talked about people like Henri Fayol. Now, moving forward, we're going to be thinking about how you can manage people. And there's going to be various kinds of theories that we can have. Now, in the exam, examiners like testing theories. So you will have to be knowledgeable. You'll have to know about all the elements of each of the theories that we're going to be talking about. So we've talked about managing. Just a brief mention then, it says, what is leadership? Leadership is basically a little bit more than just managing people. You can be a manager simply by being given a set of tasks to do and getting the people who work for you to carry out those tasks. Being a leader is a little bit more to do with motivating people and giving people big ideas. So, to be honest with you, it doesn't really make an awful lot of difference as far as F1 is concerned, but in theory, in an organisation, you might only have one leader, the person at the very top, who is in charge, for example, of thinking what is the organisation going to do in the long term. You may have lots of managers who are carrying out the wishes of that leader, actually making it happen. So you can see here it says leadership is particularly interested in motivation, which is a topic that we'll see later on, and also to do with power. Remember, power is all about being able to influence people, whereas managers is much more to do with authority. So managers get people to do things because they have to, because the manager is more senior to them. Leaders get people to do things because people want to do what the leader wants them to, which is the big difference between the two. We're going to have some theories then to do with management and to do with leadership. Now, the very early studies of things like management and leadership were really looking to see, are there any things in common that great leaders have? And it was called the trait theory. Were there any similar traits? Were there any similar characteristics that leaders had? And some of the things that the theorists came up with included things like being self-assured, so in other words, being confident, being above average intelligence, having the intelligence to be able to deal with a situation. The third one there, the helicopter factor, basically means the ability to be able to see the big picture. Often as a manager, you can get bogged down, you can get involved in lots and lots of detail. Good leaders have the ability to take a step back from that and to see the big picture, to see what is happening overall. So as I say, the idea behind these first theories was to try and look at leaders, look at historical leaders and see if they had these things in common. Entrepreneurial skill. We're talking here particularly about leaders of a business. Leaders of a business have got to know how to make the business successful. And that, of course, means making the business profitable. So they have to be entrepreneurial, know how to turn their ideas into money. They have to be healthy. Now, that one may not seem immediately obvious, but obviously if you are healthy, you tend to live longer. As you live longer, you tend to gain more experience. So a good leader is often healthy enough to have lived a long time. The final one you've got there, it says that leaders are often above average height. Now, that's obviously something that I completely disagree with because I am below average height. So the idea was that they looked at what leaders were like. They looked for these common characteristics, and to be honest with you, they didn't really find very many of them. So the trait theories of leadership, which were the first ideas, the first attempts to try and come up with some ideas about leadership, didn't really work. They looked at lots of different leaders and they didn't really find an awful lot in common. So those ideas haven't really got very far. An idea that has been around for a while and does seem to be quite successful is the ideas of a guy called Adair. And Adair talks about what he refers to as action-centred leadership. Adair says that a good manager, a good leader, has to do three things at the same time. There will be times during the day, there will be times during the week when they are concentrating on one rather than the others, but all managers, at least successful managers, have to do these three things. First of all, they have to get the task done. So whatever the tasks that their department have been given have got to be finished. Either the manager will do them themselves, or the manager will make sure that the team get them done. But one way or the other, there are things that need to get done. So the tasks are important. Also, individuals. It's very important that a manager and a leader looks after the individuals that are working for them. We will talk about this again, particularly when we talk about motivation later on in the course. If the individuals in a department aren't happy, if the individuals in a department are demotivated, then they won't produce very good work. So the task might get done, or it might not get done at all because the individuals aren't happy. The task might get done, but the quality of it is very poor because, again, the individuals are unhappy. So one of the jobs of the manager is also to make sure that all the individuals are actually happy with what they are doing. Now, that's very different to making sure that the task is done. And the final one we've got there is making sure that the individuals work together as a team. It could end up in a particular department that everybody is really doing their own thing and none of them are helping each other, none of them are working together, and they're all actually making their own working lives harder by not seeking any help from their colleagues. So the final thing that a good manager needs to do, a good leader needs to do, is try and make sure that everybody works together. So as I said a few minutes ago, the idea behind this is that a manager has to do all three of these things, although there will be times when, for example, they go around and talk to all the individuals to see if they're okay. There will be times when they perhaps try and get everybody together and divide tasks up so they can work as a team. You two work together, you three work together on this project. And there'll be times when they're just concentrating on making sure everything is done. Knowing which bits are important, knowing when to focus on the team, when to focus on the individual, when to focus on the task, that's the skill of a good manager. So Adair comes up with what he calls action-centred leadership. That's the sort of thing that you will get in an exam. They will say, here are 4 that are in action-centred leadership, and one of them won't be in there. There'll be 3 correct answers, task, team, individual, and there'll be another one that actually doesn't belong there. So Adair's ideas are useful. I think they're a sensible idea, but they're not actually particularly practical. So moving over the page, we have the ideas of a pair of writers called Blake and Mouton. Now, there are a number of ways in which management theories, all the theories that we have in paper F1, there are a number of places that they come from. Some theorists sit down and think about something, and they basically come up with an idea in their heads. This is what should happen. This is what I think. Other theorists basically have gone out and watched people and seen what people actually do, and then come back and said, I have now come up with a theory based on what I have observed. And Blake and Mouton is one of those second kinds. So it's all about going out, watching what people do, and then coming back and saying, I can divide managers up into a number of different types. And that's what Blake and Mouton did. So the various different things that Blake and Mouton are thinking about, the most important of them is they said that some managers are particularly concerned with tasks, some managers are particularly concerned with people. Now, we said a few minutes ago with Adair that all managers should be interested in the tasks, they should be interested in the team and in the individual. So in other words, some things are to do with people, some things are to do with tasks. Now, managers have to pay attention to all of those, but some managers concentrate more on one bit, some managers concentrate more on other bits. So what Blake and Mouton did is they came up with a graph, they came up with a grid. They said, we can divide managers up. We will give them a rating, we will give them a score between 0 and 9 for how seriously they take the tasks that their team has got to carry out. So a score of 9 means they take it very seriously, score of 0 means they're really not that bothered. Similarly, 0 to 9 for how they look after their people. So how much of their time is spent talking about people. So 9, they spend a lot of time with people. 0, they really couldn't care less. Now, you can put any manager in any situation anywhere on that grid. You could get people, for example, who are perhaps somewhere towards the top left or somewhere towards the bottom right. But what you'll get tested on in the exam is the 4 extremes, the 4 corners, plus the one in the middle. So basically, what Blake and Mouton said was, here are 4 extremes, and managers might be closer to one of these extremes rather than to something else. So, the 5 extremes that we have, first of all, down in the bottom right-hand corner, we have what's called a task-focused manager. A task-focused manager basically does not care about the individuals at all. All of their time is spent making sure that tasks get done. Now, you again remember that these are extremes that Blake and Mouton have come up with, so you don't actually find that many managers who are like this. If they are like this, maybe it's because of their personality. They like ordering people around and not listening to them. Or perhaps it's because of the situation. So, for example, you could make an argument that something like the armed forces, the military, you would get lots of managers there who are task-focused managers. Somebody who is in charge of a squad of troops in the army probably doesn't worry too much about, are the soldiers going to like the orders that I'm about to give them? It's all about doing what you've been told to do because that's appropriate in that kind of situation. So a task-focused manager says, do what I'm telling you and I don't want to hear anything more about it. Now, as I say, there is nothing wrong with that in the right circumstances. The second one that I will mention is the one in the opposite corner, in the top left-hand corner, which is what's called a country club manager. A country club manager basically spends all their time making sure that the people are happy, making sure that the individuals are motivated. Now, that can be a very good thing, that can be a very bad thing. The idea in theory is that if you simply get a good group of workers, people who are, going to work particularly hard, particularly that you can leave them on their own to work particularly hard, you simply make sure that they are motivated and then you get out of their way and let them get on with the work. So let's say the types of places you tend to find this are things like creative industries. So where you have to have people coming up with ideas. The important thing here is recruit the right people, make sure that they are motivated, and then let them get on with things. So a country club manager can work very well because you simply let the individuals get on and do the things that they're good at without getting in their way. It can, of course, be a complete disaster because if you've chosen the wrong people, if your recruitment that we talked about earlier, if your recruitment is poor, all that will happen is you'll say to these workers, go away and do something, and they won't do anything because you're not checking up on them. So country club management can be very good under appropriate circumstances. On the other hand, it can be a disaster. So country club management. Down in the bottom left-hand corner, what's called an impoverished manager basically doesn't really care about anything. So an impoverished manager is not interested in getting the tasks done. An impoverished manager is not interested in the people. Now, you might say to yourself, when would that ever happen? When would you have a manager who doesn't really care about anything? Hopefully, not very often. However, there are circumstances where you might get something like that. Let's say, for example, that you have a manager in charge of a department and the department is being closed. Everybody knows that in 1 month's time, that department is going to be closed. Well, maybe the manager doesn't really care. Maybe the manager has handed their notice in. They are leaving to go somewhere else. Why would they care? Maybe, and again, hopefully this won't happen, but maybe the manager has actually been promoted too far. The manager knows that they are not actually able to do the job properly. So what do? They just give up. They just don't really bother with anything. Now, hopefully, that one won't happen very often, but unfortunately, it does come up occasionally. The star in the middle there, a middle-of-the-road manager, I think that one speaks for itself. That's a manager who is average at everything. So they do spend some time looking after the people, they do spend some time concentrating on the tasks. And I would imagine that most managers we come across in real life are probably somewhere near to that one. However, Blake and Mouton did identify some very, very, very good managers. And these particular managers are the ones that everybody should try and aim towards. They're the ones in the top right-hand corner. They worry about the tasks and they worry about the people. Now, I have been very lucky because I have actually worked for 2 people who I think are, out of anywhere on that grid, they are closer to the top right-hand corner than anywhere else. One particular manager that I worked for knew that there were certain times of the year, certain times of the month, when we were going to be busy. And when we were going to be busy, the manager would come round and basically make sure that all the work was done. They would check the work, they would give us lots of tasks to do, they would make us stay late if the tasks needed doing. So they made sure all the tasks got done. However, once the tasks were done, often what the manager would say was, you have worked really hard this week. We had this task that we had to complete. Now it is done. Next week, we will have a much more restful week. So come in late each day next week. Or come in the normal times and take an extra day off. So they would deliberately make sure that there'd be 1 week or one period where we were concentrating very much on a task and working really hard to get it done. But then once that was done and out of the way, then they would deliberately make the next week a lot lighter. If there were any tasks to be done the second week, they would try and postpone them. So we had a bit of a break. Now that meant that we all really liked working for that manager because we respected them. When the work was there to be done, it was done, but then the manager would be, in effect, give something back to us. A really good manager to work for. Now, I hope that you work for a manager who is like that. If not, maybe you can try and persuade them to be like that. So Blake and Mouton, kind of way that will be examined in the test. It may well be that you get, again, here are 4 different types of manager. One of them is a name that they've made up. So one of them they've invented and isn't one of Blake and Mouton's. Or alternatively, the way that I can see Blake and Mouton being tested is they give you a little example. They say, here is the manager, this is what the manager does, what kind of manager do you think they are? Where would Blake and Mouton put them? And it will be one of those 4 corners, usually. Now, talking of management, Blake and Mouton, and to be honest, the action-centred leadership that John Adair comes up with, are really talking about the tasks that people do and people. They're talking about what the manager spends their time on. What they don't do is they don't really talk about how the manager does anything. Now, how the manager does something is what we've got when we talk about the Ashridge model, which is to do with the theories of leadership. Now, the Ashridge model says, how do you communicate things with your staff So, for example, you can spend a lot of time with your staff. You can be very much a people-based manager. Yeah, maybe like a country club manager. But the Ashridge model says, when you're spending time with your people, how do you communicate with them? There's 4 different ways that managers communicate with people according to Ashridge. First of all, tells people. The telling stage is simply giving people orders. You will do this, get on and do it. I am the boss, I am telling you what to do, now go on and do it. That's the end of it. Sells is where we give people orders, but then we explain them. Particularly, we explain why. Here is your task, this is why it's important. Third thing, consults. The manager asks the worker, what do you think? But then the manager actually makes a decision. So, I will ask you what you think. Now you've given me your ideas, I will put them together with my ideas and I will come up with a decision that you are going to do. But at least I talked to you about it. The final one, the joins, is where you make a joint decision. So the manager says, let's make the decision together. Now those are obviously 4 very, very, very different ways of communicating things, ranging from do this because I've told you, the tells, do this because I've told you, but this is why I want you to do it, the sells. What do you think we should do? Now I will make a decision, the consults. And what do you think that we should do, the joins? Which of those 4 is best? And obviously, there is no straight answer. It all depends on the circumstances. So, for example, if there is a task that needs doing urgently, probably the tells approach would be the best. This needs to be done urgently, get on and do it. If it's a very complicated task, if, for example, the worker is feeling a little bit demotivated, then maybe the best thing to do is to explain why they're doing something. That could be part of the training that you give somebody. The consults bit is good because maybe the manager deliberately wants to get a range of opinions before they do anything. Maybe, for example, the manager is talking to workers and the workers deal with customers. So the manager has to make a decision to do with customers. They ask the workers because the workers meet the customers. So what do you think the customers are interested in? And finally, the joins one. We will make a joint decision together. Again, it may well be that the workers have got a lot of experience in something. So again, in the exam, 4 possible things that you could have. Examiner gives you 4 of them. 1 of them actually isn't in that model at all. The examiner makes something up. Or alternatively, again, here is a manager. They are doing something. They are talking to their staff. This is what they say to the staff. Which one of these 4 are they doing? So the Ashridge model talks particularly about how we do something. It doesn't talk about what we do. It talks about how we do it. Now, there are a number of theories that you have in this particular section. So you've already had Adair, we've had Blake and Mouton, we've had the Ashridge model. There are a number of them. Fiedler, I feel, is the most complicated out of all of them because it's the least intuitive. It's not an obvious theory, whereas I think Blake and Mouton is fairly obvious. We have all come across managers who are more task-focused. We've come across managers who are more country club-type managers. I think the Ashridge model is obvious. There are times our boss explains things. There are times our boss simply says, get on and do something. But Fiedler is a little bit more complicated. What Fiedler is talking about is that you have to adapt your leadership style, depending on what the circumstances are. Up to now, most of the theorists have pretty much said you need to keep doing the same thing. You need to worry about the tasks, you need to worry about the people. Whereas Fiedler says you need to completely change the way that you manage depending on your situation. It's sometimes known as the situational theories of leadership. So, first of all, there are three things that Fiedler noted when he went out to look at managers in real life. First of all, the leader-stroke-member relations simply means, does the leader get on with the workers? It does not mean that they perhaps have to be friendly with the workers. That's not quite what Fiedler means. But it's things like, will the workers listen to what the leader says? Do they have respect for the leader? The second thing is the task structure. We can have a structured task and we can have an unstructured task. Now, a structured task simply means that there is one way to go about doing something. You have got a task, you do this, followed by this, followed by this, followed by this. If you follow those 4 steps, you will complete the task. Now, I suppose a good example of a structured task might be something like calculating a variance when you are doing paper F2. So if you're doing a material price variance, what do? You calculate the same things over and over and over again. You take the standard price, you take the actual price, you take the actual quantity. So there are a set of steps that you go through, and if you follow the steps, you get the answer. Similarly, if you're doing F3, if you're doing financial accounting and you're calculating the depreciation, you will work out how much is an asset worth, you'll work out what the useful economic life is, you work out how much you're going to depreciate it each year. There's steps to follow, and if you follow them in the right order, you will get the right answer. That's a structured task. An unstructured task is where there is no particular way of doing something. Now, obviously, this is quite a long way in the future, but one of the things that you will notice when you're studying the ACCA is that the further you get through the exams, the more unstructured the questions become. So for a lot of the F-level papers, you can learn what to do. For a lot of the P-level papers that you'll get to later on, you can't learn what to do. Each question is different. So one of the things that Fiedler says is the task structured? Follow these steps, or is it unstructured? And finally, how much power have they got? High power or low power? Remember, we've already said, we saw it previously, that power is the ability to get people to do what you want. Somebody with a lot of power has got a lot of ability to influence people. So maybe they can reward people, maybe they can punish people, maybe they're a role model as well, maybe they're also an expert in something. They've got lots of different kinds of power. They're high power. Low power means it's difficult to convince people what to do. So what Fiedler says is, have a look and see what is going on. Have a look and see what the situation is. For example, it says, or what Fiedler says, is that if you have got so, for example, what Fiedler says, if you have got an extreme situation, for example, the workers don't particularly like or respect you. For example, you don't have a lot of power over the workers. The best thing to do is to adopt a psychologically distant style. What that means is basically focus on the tasks. So, I know that you don't respect me. I know that I don't have a lot of ability to influence you. Here is the task. Please get on and do it. I'm just going to get out of the way. So focus on the tasks. On the other hand, if you get on well with the workers, if they like you, If you've got a lot of power over them, then be friendly towards them. The workers will respond to that. So it depends what the circumstances are. That second one, a psychologically close style, would basically mean that we focus on the people. So make sure the people are happy and they will work. They will work because they respect the boss, and also the boss has the ability to influence them. So get to know them better. Psychologically distant, just tell them what to do and don't try and be friends with them. So Fiedler's trying to say you may have to change what you do depending on what the situation is. Over the page, we have got different kinds of leadership. It talks about functional leaders are ones who've got expert power. Now, to be honest with you, that's just a definition that we will have. There's not really an awful lot to say with that. If you remember, expert power simply means you can influence others because you are knowledgeable about a particular subject. And that's, to be honest, all that says again. Bennis talks about leaders and basically talking about two different kinds of leader. Transactional leaders are basically more like managers. It means that they are the head of a company, but basically what they will do is they will look at details, they will make sure that things run smoothly. Transformational leaders, on the other hand, notice what it says, they want to inspire change. Transformational leaders are very good when you want to do something new. Some leaders are very, very good at saying what we have been doing in the past is no longer appropriate, we need to change it, and being able to persuade people that they need to do something different. Transactional leaders aren't particularly good at that. Transactional leaders are better at doing things that have been done previously. In other words, carrying on with things the same way. So in the exam, which of those two is better? Well, it depends. If there is no need to change anything, a transactional leader is fine. On the other hand, if something needs changing, a transformational leader would be better. So it's all to do with what kind of situations that we get in the exam. Now, change is going to be a big thing, and we're going to see it later on during the course. So, one of the ideas that we've got behind change is how do we get people to change anything at all? 6 different methods that you can come up with. Now, to be honest with you, some of these are more likely to be tested than others, but we'll have a look at them just to be on the safe side. Participation and involvement. I think that one speaks for itself. You want something to be changed, get the staff involved. In other words, get the staff to come up with their own ideas. What do you think we should do? Education and communication. The leader decides and then explains. We are going to have to change this because. So you don't give the workers any choice, but you at least explain what's going to happen. The support bit is basically making sure that we help the workers during the change. Now, I suppose a good example of this would be, imagine that you have got a group of workers, maybe a finance department, who are changing from one computer system to another computer system. So they're changing perhaps the accounting package that they are used to using. Now, that's obviously going to be very stressful for them, because not only will they have to change the accounting package, they've also got all the routine tasks that the finance department have always had to do. So in effect, they've got double the work that they would normally have. So what you do is temporarily, during that period where they are changing from one computer system to another and learning how the new one works, you perhaps recruit some temporary workers to come in and do the day-to-day tasks, so recording all the transactions. That means that for that short period of time, the workers can concentrate on learning how the new computer system works and not have to worry about their normal job. You are supporting them during that change. Once the new computer system is up and running, once the workers have been trained on it and are happy with it, then you don't need the temps anymore and the workers go back to carrying out these routine tasks. So you support them during the time when it's going to be the most stressful for them. So that might be quite a useful way of getting some change done. Otherwise, if you don't do that, the workers may not find time to learn how to use the new computer system properly. Manipulation is basically trying, obviously, to get people to do what we want. Now, to be honest with you, I'm not sure that one is as likely to come up in the exam, because that one's quite difficult to test. So manipulating people basically means putting them in a situation where they're going to have to do what you want. Yep, so it's not necessarily a very good way of doing it, but Kotter says it does happen. Negotiation is obviously more common. So negotiation, if you're talking about change, if you do this for me, I will do something for you. So what you often see in real life is you'll see something like a group of workers agreeing to change the way that they do their work. And in return, they might get, for example, a slightly shorter working week. Or, for example, they might be given a small pay rise, or they might be given some other kind of benefit. So the idea is they are helping the company by changing something, so the company gives them something in return. You can almost argue that that's like a reward. Remember with reward power? Do this for me and there's a reward in it for you. That's what negotiation is like. And the final one, coercion, remember, was to do with threats. So you basically say to people, you will do this or else there is going to be a problem. So you go to all of your workers and you say, I want you to do something differently. And then you say to your workers, if you don't do this, you will be fired. That would be explicit coercion. Implicit coercion is where you don't actually threaten to fire somebody, but you make it very clear that if they don't go along with you, there is going to be a problem. So you go along to your workers and you say, I want all of you to change the way you do things. And then you go on and say, none of you have to do this. It is completely voluntary. If you don't want to change, you don't have to. But when it comes next year and everybody's getting their bonuses, then obviously we will take that into account. Or, I want you all to change, you don't have to, but next year we are going to be looking at how many staff we are going to be needing, and obviously people who have embraced this change will be more likely to keep their jobs. Now, I've not actually threatened anybody. I've not said to anybody they will lose their job if they don't change. I've not said to anybody they won't get a bonus if they don't change. So I've not explicitly said anything, but everybody would understand you will change or you will suffer. That's implicit coercion. I don't actually say it, but everybody knows that that's what I mean. Now again, which of those is best, which of those is worst, it does depend on the situation. I think most of us would be happier with the ones like negotiation, do something for me, get something in return, like education, change this because. We'd be happier with those positive ones, but there are times when you have to use the other ones as well. So again, in the exam, either the examiner will give you 3 of those and will then make up the 4th one, and obviously the 4th one will be wrong, or alternatively what will happen is the examiner will give you a situation and will say, which kind of model do you think they are using? So are they using education? Are they using facilitation? Are they using coercion? What do you think they are doing? Remember, because of that, I think manipulation is the one that's hardest to describe. So I think that's the one that the examiner's least likely to use. Finally, we have got Heifetz. Heifetz basically, again, is talking about change. Remember, the reason why change comes in a lot with leadership, as opposed to being to do with managing people, is because leaders are there to have the big picture for the organisation, and they often have to persuade people that they need to change. They often have to identify in the first place that change is necessary. So a good leader will say, we need to change because this is how we're going to change. So Heifetz says, you can see at the top, the traditional model, leaders have all the answers. That may sound familiar because that's what Taylor said. That is what Fayol said. Remember, with both of those, the manager decided, the worker did what they were told. Heifetz says that what you should actually do is you should help the worker and let the worker come up with the solutions for themselves. Now that is very, very important. In theory, that sounds like a really good idea because presumably workers know what needs changing better than managers do. After all, the worker is the person that's doing the job. However, that will only work if you've got the right kind of employee. If you've got the type of employee who is happy to do that, then you've got no problems whatsoever. So if you've got the kind of employee who is happy to think, I've identified an issue, it needs changing, why don't we do this? Then great. If you've got the type of employee who basically says, I am not going to come up with any ideas, you're the manager, that's your job, then Heifetz isn't going to work. So it links in with the kind of people that we recruit and select that we saw back in the very first sections. So Heifetz says that there are two kinds of change. Technical changes, for example, there is a new type of technology which means that we need to change the way we do something. There is a new kind of computer program that we are going to adopt, which means we need to change something. So technical changes, to a certain extent, not always, but to a certain extent, technical changes are forced upon you. You have to do this because. On the other hand, adaptive changes tend to be small. They tend to be ongoing. They are often changes that you decide that you are going to make. So a technical change could be a very large change that you make occasionally. An adaptive change could be lots and lots of little small changes that you make almost continuously. So particularly when we're dealing with adaptive change, you can see Heifetz suggests that we carry out the following. First of all, we have to recognise what is the problem. So we have to recognise that there even is a problem. Before anybody wants to change anything, they have to know that there is something that needs changing. So what you might need to do is you might need, remember you're the manager, you might need to try and get your workers to think about, is there a problem at all? So perhaps there is a problem with the quality of the work. How could you persuade your workers that there is a problem? Well, maybe pass on to them comments from customers. Maybe get them to go and look at the customer returns department to see how much work they have got. So persuade them that something is wrong. It then says application of appropriate pressure. What we are talking about there is we are basically saying that we need to persuade people. We need to persuade the staff perhaps to look for a solution. Now what I mean by that is that if you just say to the workers, there is a problem with the quality, fix it, work out how to come up with it, they may come up with a very good idea but one that suits them. The manager has to also think about, will it suit other departments? So one way to improve the quality might simply be to spend 5 times as much money getting better raw materials. Now the workers might come up with that idea and think that's a brilliant idea. The trouble is the finance department won't think very much of that. The purchasing department won't think very much of that. So one of the things that the leader might have to do is perhaps try and push the workers towards looking at a particular way of improving quality rather than a different way. Remember, the leader is not going to tell them what to do. The leader is trying to make them look at a particular area, concentrate on that rather than another one. The focus bit basically means that we have to concentrate on changing. That might mean that, for example, I say to the workers, on Friday, you are not actually going to produce anything at all. On Friday, you guys come in and we're going to spend the day thinking about how to improve the quality. What you may have to do is you may then have to take the workers away from their regular job. Because you know what it's like, your regular job often takes up all the time that you have. So you don't get time to think about what you would like to change. You're too busy just getting your work done. So maybe you have a day where you say to everybody, you're not going to do your regular tasks, you're going to look at this instead. Maybe you even take them out of the office. Take them somewhere else where they can't be distracted. And finally, the idea of ownership basically means that you let the workers come up with the ideas. Now that's a very powerful thing. We will see that again later on in the course. Ownership is a very powerful idea because if the workers come up with their own ideas, they are much more likely to be enthusiastic about them. They will be carried out better. They will be carried out quicker. If the ideas are imposed on the workers, so in other words, if the manager says, this is what I think, the workers may do it, but only reluctantly. So ownership means you actually let the workers come up with their own ideas, which also means you have to accept what they come up with, as long as it's not too ridiculous. But you can't go around saying, what do you think? And when the workers tell you, say that's a really good idea, but we're going to do what I want. Won't work. So ownership, let the workers come up with their own ideas. Even to the extent of when somebody comes along, somebody from another department, maybe an even more senior person comes along and says, that is a really good idea. Whose idea was it? The manager shouldn't say it was theirs. The manager should give the credit to the workers because that's where the ideas came from. So ownership is a particularly good idea in this particular circumstance. So the idea that Heifetz is getting at is rather than the boss coming up with the ideas, as Fayol and Taylor said, the manager puts in place a way that the workers will come up with their own ideas and then the ideas get implemented. Now, as I say, that's very different to what we had as the ideas 100 years ago. It also means you need a different kind of worker. So 100 years ago, Fayol and Taylor wanted workers who would do what they were told. Heifetz wants workers who will do what they think is best and come up with their own ideas, which is not necessarily the same thing. Now, again, I hope you can see that even though we've got lots of chapters that we've had so far, the ideas start to come together. So Heifetz relies on you having selected the right people in the first place. Heifetz relies on you having trained the people so that they can do all these things, maybe develop them with these skills so that they can come up with their own ideas in the first place. Heifetz relies on the fact that up to now, as a manager, you have been talking to your staff, you've been worried about what they get on. So in other words, you've been doing the team and the individual part of action-centred leadership. Heifetz relies on the fact that up to now, you might have done selling ideas to them, so talking to them and explaining, Or you might have consulted them, asked them what they think, or you might even have joined in with them already. Because the reason is, if you have a task-focused manager who has only ever told the workers what to do, I'm the boss, this is what you're doing, get the work done, and suddenly they try and do what HiFITS is saying, it won't work, because the workers just won't be used to it. The manager will find it difficult to ask the workers what they think, and the workers will find it very difficult because they're not used to the boss asking them. They may not even want the boss to ask them. So HiFITS relies on lots of other parts of the syllabus that we've already looked at being done correctly that will lead up to it. So when we are talking about F1, it is very easy to put things into lots of little boxes. Here is leadership, here is recruitment, here is development, but really a lot of the ideas go together.